Hello, everyone. I'm Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Animal Sanctuary. Welcome to Serpentes Sunday for March 31st, 2024. I often use the word habituate or habituation in many of my videos, so I'm just going to give you a quick definition of what habituation is and talk to you a little bit today about passive versus active habituation, and I'm going to show you some examples with snakes. Habituation occurs when a physiological or emotional response to something is diminished following repeated exposure to whatever that something is. An animal is exposed to the same thing or stimulus over and over again, and eventually they just stop responding to it. It's because behavioral plasticity allows animals to start filtering out stimuli that they have learned are irrelevant, and then they focus on things that matter. It means that an animal gets used to something or that you get used to something, so you're just not worried or afraid of it anymore. You've seen it enough times, been around it enough times, been exposed to it enough times when nothing bad's happened and it really hasn't been anything that's relevant to you, so now you just start ignoring it. There are several ways that we can habituate animals to stimuli that we don't want them to be worried about anymore. Active and passive are two types of habituation, and forced exposure or flooding is a type of active habituation. It's where the animal is exposed repeatedly to something that they're afraid of and they are not free to move away. Now, this is bad. This is considered unethical and it's not condoned by reputable animal behavior or animal training credentialing organizations, including the ones that I belong to and am credentialed through. So flooding is something we don't do. This forced exposure to a stimulus the animal is not able to escape from. It's considered unethical. Gradual exposure is slow desensitization to some stimuli over time. It's also called gradual desensitization. It is a form of active habituation. We use this quite often, but the animal is free to leave at any time. So we just slowly and gradually, incrementally expose an animal to something that worries them or that they're afraid of until over time they're not reacting to it anymore. But if they're starting to reach a threshold where they are becoming distressed by it, we can take that thing away, or the animal is free to move away at any time. So this is good, and it's a great thing to use. And then there's passive exposure. This is passive habituation, passive desensitization. It's totally voluntary on the animal's part, and this is great. This is where we would like the animal to get used to something, so we leave it in an area where they're able to see it and or interact with it physically, but they don't have to. So if I want to get my horse used to a blanket, I can throw it in their pasture and I'm going to have to weight it down with a rock so it doesn't blow away, but it's not going to interfere with them getting to their food or to their water or any other resources. And it's just there in their pasture every day, all day. They can see it and they can choose to approach it, retreat from it, interact with it as they choose, until eventually it's nothing that bothers them anymore. They realize that it's nothing to be afraid of. They can touch it, they can bite it, they can paw it, and they realize, okay, this isn't scary. If I want my snake to get used to a stethoscope for when they're going to go to the veterinarian, then I can put a stethoscope in the snake's enclosure or in their enrichment area, not anywhere where it's going to interfere with them accessing resources in case they're afraid of it, but just off to the side somewhere where they can see it. They can approach it, they can retreat from it, they can choose to touch it, tongue flick at it, smell it, interact with it physically if they want, until eventually it's just another thing that's there. It doesn't mean anything to them and they're not afraid of it. Then when they do have to go to the vet and the doctor is listening to their heart and lungs and body sounds with a stethoscope, it's not a device that's going to frighten them because they're already used to what it is. That is passive habituation or passive exposure.
Now let's take a look at an example of active habituation through target training. So this item that I've got hanging on the outside of Hare's enclosure is something I would like to introduce to her so that in the future she can start wrapping herself around that. I can lift that item up and I can move her to another location. She's never seen this item before. She is free to move away from it at any time. And the reason this is active and not passive habituation is I am an active participant in this process now. I am directing her to come toward or near this novel object in order to help her get used to it. But I'm not forcing her. And so if you'll notice, I'm holding the target near the object, but I am allowing her to approach the target in her own time. And when she clearly didn't want to get closer to that object than she was, I moved the target a little bit further away from it. And I turned this into a more normal target training session for her where she just targeted over the threshold. Now we're going to do that exact same active habituation training session with another snake. This is Zeb. He's a coastal carpet python. Now Hera was really close to her door when we started her session. Zeb was not. Zeb is all the way at the other end of his enclosure. So I'm first having to target him from the back end of his enclosure over a perch and over a branch and over some items in his enclosure to get him to the threshold. And he's doing a great job. Obviously, he wanted me to reinforce him sooner than I wanted to. So I just ignored the strike, and I ignored this second strike. And if you just ignore the strike and keep going, many snakes will just extinguish that behavior over time when they see that it's not gaining them any reinforcement. And this works well for him, just ignoring the striking, because he settles into the training session and eventually does what I ask him to do. And this is where knowing your learner comes in handy. But if you'll see with him, he went right around that item and really didn't give it much thought. Unlike Hera, who didn't seem afraid of the item, but she was hesitant to interact with the item, and she ended up getting close to it and tongue flicking at it, but not wrapping around it. So Zeb has actually coiled around this, and I could easily pick it up and move it with him on it. And I can move it to a station, I could move it to a scale, I can move it to an exercise tent.
Everybody, thanks for learning with me today. I hope that you found the definitions and explanations in the beginning helpful, and that you also appreciated the demonstrations and that was interesting and a learning experience for you. Contact me with questions, or if becoming a student interests you, please visit my Patreon. And until next time, everybody, please remember to always be kind and love your animals.